thanks to social media, we saw lots of citizens there in St. Vincent and the Grenadines going live, and it would appear to us that the authorities were unprepared for, in terms of, as you mentioned, the evacuations and so on. We saw lots of persons stranded. As a matter of fact, we saw some posts on social media which suggested even persons who were at the centers, the evacuation centers and shelters, had to sign for instance, a bottle of water. What's happening on the ground in St. Vincent and the Grenadines?
Yes, well, this is the thing, we had meetings. This is as the leader of the opposition and members of the opposition in the parliament. We had a meeting with Nemo and the chief scientist just on Tuesday, just 2 days before the evacuation order came. And we were asking the questions about preparedness and so forth, and we were assured that, well, the authorities had put things in place to evacuate people, and that the shelters were being prepared and so forth. Of course, on the night of the evacuation, on the Thursday last week and then into Friday, it became evident that in many of the shelters, the basic things were not there, like blankets and cots and water and so forth. And in fact, some of that is still being put in place. So there was considerable inconvenience to many of the people who moved there. Now, a lot of the people, they were happy to be out of the danger zone. There was the relief of finally being from under the shadow of the volcano, so to speak. So, and some of them, they're very patient in the sense that they said, well, listen, these are situations that you can't predict everything. You can't have everything the way that you would prefer them to be, but we will make do. But certainly the sleeping arrangements and so forth were, you've seen many of the postings that people have made, and I had witnessed for myself in two of the centers I visited last Friday, that they were not what they should have been. Hopefully by now they have put those things in place. I visited 3 more shelters today on the leeward side, 3 or 4, and there was different levels of preparedness or putting the things in place to assist the person. Some of them were better off than others, to put it mildly. Shower facilities and so forth still being put in place in some of the centers. And of course, we had the difficulty now because we don't have any, on the mainland, there's a shortage of water because the water authority had to cut off the water supply because it had been, as someone described it, a slurry contaminated with the ash. So that is the primary difficulty that people are feeling. If you don't have a properly constructed shower and you have running water, people will still take, a shower. But the absence of running water in homes across the mainland and in the shelters made things very, very difficult for people. I witnessed that myself today.
And Dr. Friday, as you would have gone through those shelters, we saw you being engaged in some table tennis by some of the residents there in one of those shelters. But I understand you trying to alleviate some of the fears and have a light moment at one of those centers there. Did you get specific complaints that you think might have been critical and should have been addressed beforehand, outside of what you've already mentioned? And if you did, how are those being addressed currently?
Well, there are deficiencies now. So, the fact that there are suggests that there are things that ought to have been done, should have been done sooner. The provision of water supply, for example, meaning that you have an alternate to the tap water. That is, you have tanks that would be storing water for the time when the water was shut off, either because it's contaminated or just to conserve, water. So that wasn't there. And of course, in some of the shelters, I saw one shelter today where, it seemed like that's the way it ought to have been done. They had running water still because they had a tank up on the roof that was full of water, and whenever the water comes back on, they would fill it up so that when the water supply goes, then they have running water in school that is serving as the shelter. And that's the way that it should be done in all of the centers. And we knew what the centers were, and they were properly identified, and people were given notice and so forth. So we would have hoped that those things would have been there. Now, there has been a lot of, I mean, the thing that really swells my heart is the generosity of our people, locally. Everybody has sort of chipped in. People have decided that, I'm going to make some bread and take to 2 or 3 of the shelters. I'm going to donate my blankets and sheets and so forth. And more of that is happening. Various organizations, church organizations, political organizations, individuals are phoning and asking me here, how can we contribute? We have set up a center here in my own constituency, in my home town in Bequia, to take things from people who want to donate. But, all over they are doing so here in St. Vincent and in the region as well. And so we are so grateful to our brothers and sisters in the region who have taken on our plight and have responded positively internationally similarly. So a lot of those needs will eventually be met, but right now there's still a lot to be done to have sleeping, bedding, blankets and sheets and beds and cots, to have drinking water, to have toiletries so that people can, maintain their personal hygiene and so forth. And then ultimately to have, people are going to be in these shelters for some time, from what we have been told by the chief scientists. And so we are prepared. They have to be prepared mentally to say, well, this is some place that I can stay for the next, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever it takes for them to be safe. And so they will need some more, curtains and stuff like that. Once you were there for a while, you come and for the first night, you slept on a sheet on the floor or sat on the chair and so on. And, but after that, you need to have some comfort so that you can have a good rest. After a while, you won't have proper rest if you have to sleep on those conditions. So the hope is that those things will all be put in place, and they are beginning gradually. Individuals, as I said, are putting in place. The National Emergency Management Office is getting some of those things in place, but a lot of it is being done by individuals, and we're so grateful for that. And then, of course, once the initial comfort, the initial emergency and the need is taken care of, then people are people. So you have to have some of the comforts. A young child I was speaking with today, a teenager, and she was saying that she's so bored. She's only been there for 3 days, but she has nothing to do because she's there with adults. I don't know if she has internet connection or whatever. These young people, they have to be always connected. But she was saying that they needed things to do, board games and so on, because now they are going beyond the immediate need and essentially constructing a life for the time that they're going to be there in those shelters. And that is something that we have to turn our attention to, because that affects not just the physical, but the psychological well-being of those people who are evacuated.
Great.